My name is Eleanor Vance, and I'm 68 years old. What I'm about to tell you didn't just change my life, it shattered it and pieced it back together into something unrecognizable. The funeral for my husband, Arthur, was the quietest day of my existence. A cold Pennsylvania wind whipped through the Willow Creek Cemetery, but I felt nothing. The chill in my bones had nothing to do with the weather. There, beside his grave, as the final words of the pastor faded into the gray sky, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket, a message from an unknown number. It sent a tremor through me that threatened to bring me to my knees. I'm alive! That's not me in the casket. My heart stopped. The letters swam before my eyes. Grief must be making me hallucinate. With hands that shook so violently I could barely type, I replied, "Who are you?" The response was immediate, each word a hammer blow to my already broken heart. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons." That moment tore my soul in two. My world crumbled completely when I looked up and saw Michael and David, my own sons, standing beside the polished mahogany casket. Their expressions were strangely, unnervingly calm. Something was deeply wrong. Their tears seemed forced, their hugs as cold and brittle as ice. For 42 years, Arthur had been my partner, my refuge, my reason for living. Now, I stood at his grave, receiving a message that claimed he was alive, a message that pointed a finger at the two boys he had adored. I met him when I was 24, right here in Willow Creek. We grew up on the same dusty back roads, sharing modest dreams. I cleaned houses to support my sick mother, while Arthur worked at the old hardware store he inherited from his father. We were poor, but we were deliriously happy. We had something money could never buy: real, uncomplicated love. I remember the first time he truly spoke to me. It was a Tuesday morning. I was walking toward the market in my faded green dress and worn-out shoes. He stepped out of his shop, hands stained with grease, and smiled at me with a shyness that made my heart flutter. "Good morning, Eleanor," he said in a soft, steady voice. "Need any help with that leaky faucet you mentioned last week?" I had mentioned it in passing to his father, never thinking he'd remember. That conversation turned into dates under the big old oak tree in town square, then into promises of eternal love, and finally, into a simple wedding, full of hope. The first few years were a struggle. We lived in a small farmhouse with a tin roof. When it rained, we'd set out pots all over the house to catch the leaks, laughing as if it were a game. But we were happy. Arthur worked from sunup to sundown in his store, and I took in sewing for the women in town. When Michael was born, I thought my heart would burst with happiness. He was a beautiful baby with his father's big, thoughtful eyes, and my smile. 2 years later, David arrived, just as perfect. I raised them with all the love in the world, sacrificing my own needs for theirs. Arthur was a wonderful father. He'd take them fishing in the creek on Sundays, teach them to fix things with their hands, and tell them stories before bed. I fed them, dressed them, and comforted them when they cried. We were a close family, a fortress of love, or so I believed. If you are touched by our story and want to hear more tales of life, love, and unexpected turns, please consider liking this video and leaving a comment below to let me know which city you're listening from. Your support helps us grow. And don't forget to subscribe to Aunt Millie's Tales so you never miss a story. We are so grateful for every single one of you. Now back to how my world began to unravel. As the boys grew up, things started to change. Michael, the oldest, was always ambitious. From a young age, he'd ask why we lived so modestly, why we didn't have a new car like other families. David, ever the follower, echoed his brother's sentiments. When Michael turned 18, Arthur offered him a place at the hardware store, to one day take over the family business. Michael rejected it with a thinly veiled contempt. "I don't want to get my hands dirty like you, Dad," he'd said. "I'm going to be someone important." Those words hurt Arthur more deeply than any physical blow, though he never admitted it to me. I'd see him sitting on the porch at night, staring at the stars with a profound sadness in his eyes. His son had rejected not only his work, but his entire way of life. The years passed, and to my surprise, Michael made a name for himself in the city's real estate world. David followed soon after. They both started making money, far more than Arthur and I had ever seen. At first, I was so proud. My sons had achieved what we never could, escaping the tight grip of small-town poverty. But little by little, that joy turned to sorrow. Visits became less frequent, phone calls shorter. When they did come, they arrived in expensive cars, dressed in fancy suits, talking about investments and properties. They'd look at our modest home with a strange mix of pity and shame. "Mom," Michael said to me during one of their sporadic visits, "you and Dad should move somewhere better. This house is falling apart." He was right, but that house held all our memories. It was where we'd raised our sons, where we'd shared thousands of meals, where we'd grown old together. It wasn't fancy, but it was our home. Arthur, always wise, would tell me, "Eleanor, money has changed our boys. We aren't enough for them anymore." I resisted believing it. I kept justifying their absences, their brief calls, their broken promises. "They're busy building their lives," I'd tell myself. "Someday, they'll be the loving boys we raised again." But in my heart, I knew Arthur was right. We had lost our sons long before I lost my husband. I just didn't know to what extent. The most drastic change came when Michael married Tiffany Reynolds, a woman from the city who never hid her disdain for our simple lifestyle. The first time he brought her home, she arrived in high heels that sank into the dirt of our porch and an elegant red dress that looked more expensive than everything I had ever owned. "Nice to meet you," she said with a forced smile, barely extending the tips of her fingers to greet me. Her eyes scanned our humble home with an expression I couldn't decipher, but that made me feel small. During dinner, Tiffany barely touched the food I had prepared with so much love. Charles seemed nervous, constantly apologizing for things he had never been ashamed of before. "Next time, we'll take them out to a restaurant," he whispered to Tiffany, thinking I couldn't hear. But I heard him. Every word pierced my heart like a shard of glass. David, for his part, remained single but adopted the same distant attitude. His visits were limited to special occasions, and even then, he always seemed to be in a hurry to leave. Family Sundays became a distant memory. Christmases grew cold and formal. Arthur and I grew old alone, comforting each other. Things got worse when Michael bought a $200,000 house in an exclusive neighborhood. David did the same soon after, investing in a luxury condo that cost $150,000. Suddenly, our sons were owners of fortunes we couldn't even imagine. "You should sell this house and move into a retirement community," Tiffany suggested during one of her rare visits. "There are some very nice places for people your age. You'd be more comfortable." The word community hit me like a slap. A retirement home after 42 years of building our life. "We don't need a home," Arthur replied with quiet dignity. "We're fine here." But I saw the expression on Michael and David's faces. They supported Tiffany's idea. To them, we were a burden, a problem to be solved. It was then that the more direct suggestions began. Michael arrived one day with papers in his hand. "Dad, Mom," he said with that fake smile he had perfected, "I've been thinking about your future." This house is worth at most $1,000 if you sell it. I can add some money so you can move somewhere better. Besides, he continued, I think Dad should retire from the store. He's already 70 years old. It's time to rest. Arthur looked at him with infinite sadness. Son, working isn't a burden for me. It's what keeps me alive. But you could get hurt, David insisted, backing up his brother. At your age, an accident would be very dangerous. Their words sounded caring, but I sensed an impatience, an urgency I couldn't grasp. The following months were tense. My sons increased the pressure. Look, Michael said during one particularly uncomfortable dinner. Tiffany and I have decided to have kids soon. We'll need help with the expenses. If you sell the house and move to a smaller place, that money could be an early inheritance. He was asking for our inheritance while we were still alive. The audacity left me speechless. That night, after they left, Arthur looked at me with a worry I had never seen in his eyes. Something's wrong, Eleanor. This isn't just ambition. There's something darker behind all this. I had no idea how profoundly correct his words were. The last normal conversation I had with Michael was 3 weeks before Arthur's death. He came alone, without Tiffany, and looked more serious than usual. Mom, he said, I want you to know that no matter what happens, David and I will always take care of you. Remembering those words beside Arthur's grave, they sent a shiver down my spine. What did he know that I didn't? The accident that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning. Arthur had left early for the store, as he had done every day for more than 40 years. I was in the kitchen when the phone rang. Mrs. Vance? A voice I didn't know asked. I'm calling from Memorial Hospital. Your husband has been in a serious accident. You need to come immediately. The trip to the hospital was a hazy nightmare. My neighbor, Susan, had to drive me. When we got there, Michael and David were already there. That surprised me. I was the emergency contact. How did they know before I did? But in my desperation, I didn't question it. Mom, Michael said, hugging me. Dad is in bad shape. The doctors say one of the machines at the store exploded. He has severe burns and a traumatic brain injury. David's eyes were red, but something in his expression felt off. He seemed more nervous than sad. When I entered that ICU room, my heart sank. Arthur was hooked up to a dozen machines, bandages covering most of his face and arms. I barely recognized him. I walked up to his bed and took his hand, the only part of his body that seemed intact. Arthur, my love, I'm here. Everything is going to be all right. For a moment, I felt a slight squeeze in my hand. His eyes moved behind his closed lids. He was fighting. My warrior was fighting to get back to me. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. Michael and David took turns accompanying me, but they always seemed more interested in talking to the doctors about insurance policies and beneficiaries. Mom, Michael said to me on the second day, we reviewed Dad's insurance. He has a life insurance policy for $50,000. There's also a workers' comp policy that could cover up to $75,000 more. I don't care about the money, I responded harshly. I just want your dad to get better. On the third day, the doctors gave us the most devastating news. Dr. Miller, an older man with a compassionate expression, gathered us in a small office. Mrs. Vance, your husband's condition is critical. We have to be realistic. It's highly unlikely he will ever regain consciousness. My world fell apart. We want to try everything, I said through sobs, but Michael exchanged a look with David that deeply unsettled me. Mom, Michael said, we have to be practical. Dad wouldn't want to live like this. He always said he never wanted to be a burden. A burden? I exploded. He's your father. That night, alone in the hospital room, I took Arthur's hand and spoke to him. It was then that his fingers moved again, squeezing mine with a force that was almost imperceptible. His lips moved as if he were trying to say something. I called for the nurses, desperate. He's reacting. But by the time they arrived, Arthur had returned to his previous state. Sometimes there are involuntary muscle spasms, ma'am, the nurse said, shaking her head. But I knew what I had felt. 2 days later, in the early hours of Friday morning, the machine alarms went off. At 4:37 a.m., Arthur was officially declared dead. The pain was physical, as if my heart had been ripped from my chest. Michael and David arrived an hour later. They seemed prepared, bringing papers and phone numbers for funeral homes. We already talked to the Willow Creek Funeral Home, Michael said, while I was still crying inconsolably. We also contacted the insurance, David added. The claim process is already underway. How could they be so efficient, so organized, so cold? The funeral was scheduled for the following Monday. Michael took care of all the arrangements without consulting me. He chose the simplest casket, the shortest service. It was during that rushed, hollow service that I received the first text. I'm alive. Don't trust our sons. That night, alone in my house, which now felt like a tomb, I reviewed every detail. Arthur's accident had been strange from the beginning. And how had my sons gotten to the hospital so quickly? I decided to check Arthur's papers in his old wooden desk. I found the $50,000 life insurance policy Michael had mentioned. But there was something I didn't remember. The policy had been updated just 6 months earlier, increasing the coverage from $5,000 to $50,000. Why had Arthur increased his life insurance? He had never mentioned it. I kept looking and found something even more disturbing. A workers' comp policy for $5,000, purchased just 2 months before his death. My phone vibrated again. Another message from the same unknown number. Check the bank account. See who's been moving money. The next day, I went to the bank. Mrs. Thompson, the manager, showed me the statements from the last 6 months. Over the past 3 months, large withdrawals had been made from our savings account. $1,000, then $3,000, then $4,000. Money I knew nothing about. Who authorized these? I asked, my voice trembling. Your husband came in person, she explained. He said he needed the money for repairs at the store. But I kept the household accounts. Arthur had never mentioned expensive repairs. Did he come alone? I asked, my heart pounding. Now that you mention it, she said, thinking. I think he came in with one of your sons once or twice. Michael, I think. He said he was helping his dad with the paperwork because Arthur had trouble reading without his glasses. But Arthur saw perfectly well with his glasses. That afternoon, another message arrived. The insurance was their idea. They convinced Arthur he needed more protection for you. It was a trap. The evidence was piling up, but the question that terrified me was whether they had really planned Arthur's death. My phone kept receiving messages from the mysterious number. Go to Arthur's store. Look in his desk. There are things you didn't see. I decided to go. The store was strangely clean, too clean for an explosion. There were no burn marks, no debris. All the machines were intact. In Arthur's desk, I found a note in his handwriting, dated 3 days before his death. Michael insists I need more insurance. He says it's for Eleanor, but something doesn't feel right. I don't trust his intentions. Below that was another. David brought me some papers to sign. He says they're to modernize the store, but I don't understand. Why all the hurry? My husband had had suspicions. I kept searching and found a sealed envelope with my name on it. It was a letter from Arthur. My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, it means something has happened to me. In recent months, I've noticed strange changes in Michael and David. They're too interested in our money. I don't know why, but their words sound like a threat. I love you, Eleanor. If something happens to me, don't trust anyone blindly, not even our sons. The letter fell from my hands. That night, Michael came to visit. Mom, the insurance money? It's already in process. It'll be $15,000. How do you know the exact amount? I asked. Well, I helped Dad with the paperwork. He lied. He wanted to make sure you had enough money to live comfortably. He then suggested I move to a retirement community and let him and David manage my money. We could triple that amount in a few years, he said, his eyes gleaming. After he left, another message arrived. Tomorrow, go to the police station. Ask for the report on Arthur's accident. There are contradictions you need to know about. The next day, I went to the local police station. Detective Anderson, who had known Arthur for years, greeted me kindly. The report on your husband's accident? He asked, confused. What accident, Mrs. Vance? From his store, when the machine exploded. The detective checked his files. We don't have any report of an explosion at Arthur's store. In fact, we don't have any report of a work accident involving your husband. I felt the world sway. But my sons... Mrs. Vance, he said gently. Your husband arrived at the hospital on Tuesday morning, but not from a work accident. According to the medical report I have here, he arrived unconscious with symptoms of poisoning. Poisoning? The doctors found traces of methanol in his blood. A quantity sufficient to cause blindness, brain damage, and eventually death. The hospital should have informed you. Why didn't anyone tell me this? The immediate family who signed the hospital papers, your sons, requested the information be kept confidential. They said you were too emotionally fragile to handle the technical details. They had hidden the truth, invented a story, and manipulated everyone. That afternoon, David came home with flowers and the same fake smile. I confronted him. David, you knew your dad didn't die from a work accident. Panic flared in his eyes before he masked it. Mom, the grief is getting to you. You need to rest. He left quickly, making a worried phone call from the porch. That night, I received the most revealing message yet. They're coming together tomorrow. They're going to try to convince you that you're crazy. Don't believe them, and don't take anything they offer you to eat or drink. The prediction came true. The next day, Michael, David, and Tiffany arrived with expressions of exaggerated concern and a bag of pastries. Mom, we're so worried about you, Michael began. Tiffany brought your favorite pastries, David added. I remembered the message. Thank you, but I already had breakfast, I said firmly. The mask of concern began to crack. Mom, Michael said, we've been consulting with some doctors about your recent behavior. Your paranoia. Paranoia? We spoke to Dr. Albright, David chimed in. He says it's common for older people to develop paranoia after losing a partner. They were accusing me of being crazy for uncovering their lies. I am not paranoid, I said. I'm just asking questions I should have asked from the beginning. All right, Michael said, getting up abruptly. If you won't listen to reason, we'll have to take more drastic measures. We can start a legal process to have you declared mentally incompetent. It was a direct threat. That night, my phone vibrated with a message longer than the others. Eleanor, this is Mark Jensen, a private investigator. Arthur hired me 3 weeks before he died because he was suspicious of Michael and David. They poisoned him with methanol mixed in his breakfast coffee. I have audio evidence of their conversations planning everything. Tomorrow at 3 p.m., go to the corner cafe. Sit at the back table. I'll be there. At last, I would know who had been helping me. I would have the proof I needed. The war had begun, and they were about to discover that a woman fighting for the memory of her murdered husband is a force more powerful than all their greed combined. The next day, I walked to the corner cafe with determined steps. At 3 p.m. on the dot, a man in his 50s approached my table. "Mrs. Vance? I'm Mark Jensen. I'm so sorry for your loss. Arthur was a good man." He opened a folder and took out a small voice recorder. "Arthur came to see me a month ago. He hired me to investigate his sons." He pressed play. Arthur's voice filled the small space between us. "Mark, I need you to know that if something happens to me, it won't be an accident." Mark paused the recording. "But I have something more recent." He played another recording. It was Michael's voice on the phone. "No, we can't wait any longer." The old man is starting to get suspicious. "Yes, I already have the methanol." "No, Mom won't be a problem. After Dad dies, she'll be so devastated that we can do whatever we want with her." Tears rolled down my cheeks. "There's more," Mark said softly. A new recording began, David's voice. "Everything's ready. Tomorrow, Michael is going to put the methanol in Dad's coffee. We told him it was a special vitamin supplement. The idiot is going to drink it without suspecting a thing." My world completely collapsed. "How did you get these?" I sobbed. "Arthur asked me to put listening devices in your house," Mark explained. "He was afraid." He then showed me photographs of Michael buying methanol at a hardware store and financial records detailing my son's massive debts. "It wasn't just greed, Eleanor. It was desperation." He looked at me, his expression grim. "And there's one more thing you need to know. They were planning to kill you too." He played one last recording. Michael and David together. "Once we have Dad's insurance money, we need to get rid of Mom too," Michael said. "How?" David asked. "The same as with Dad. We can make it look like a suicide from depression. A widow who can't live without her husband. Nobody would question it." That same night, Mark and I went directly to the police station. For the next 2 hours, we presented all the evidence to Detective Anderson. When we finished, he shook his head in disbelief. "This is monstrous. Are you sure you want to go through with this, Mrs. Vance?" "Detective," I replied, "those men murdered my husband. They are no longer my sons. They are criminals." The district attorney was called and immediately authorized arrest warrants. At 6 a.m. the next morning, my phone rang. It was Michael. "Mom, you need to come to David's house right away. Something terrible has happened." I knew it was a trap. "I'm on my way," I lied. At 7:30 a.m., I watched from my window as police cars sped towards my son's houses. At 9 a.m., Detective Anderson knocked on my door. "Mrs. Vance, we've arrested Michael and David. They are in custody, charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder." The trial was a sensation. The courtroom was packed. When it was my turn to testify, I looked directly at my sons. I thought I had a good relationship with them. I raised them with love. I never imagined that love would become the reason for their father's murder. The most dramatic moment came when the prosecutor played the recording where they planned my own murder. A gasp of horror swept through the audience. The jury deliberated for only 6 hours. The verdict was read. Guilty on the charge of first-degree murder. Guilty on the charge of conspiracy to commit murder. The judge sentenced them both to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 30 years. Justice. Finally, there was justice for Arthur. A week after the trial, I donated the blood-stained insurance money to a new foundation for victims of family crimes. 6 months later, I received a letter from Michael. He wrote of his regret, his shame, and his intention to end his life. He was found in his cell the next day. David, upon learning of his brother's death, suffered a complete nervous breakdown and was transferred to the prison psychiatric hospital. Today, 5 years later, I live peacefully in my small house. I have converted Arthur's store into a garden where I grow flowers to take to his grave every Sunday. Mark has become a dear friend. People sometimes ask if I miss my sons. I miss the children they were, but those children died long before Arthur did. The men they became were strangers. I have learned that true family is not defined by blood, but by love, loyalty, and respect. Arthur was my true family. Justice did not bring him back, but it gave me peace. And on quiet nights, when I sit on the porch where we so often drank coffee together, I swear I can feel his presence, proud of me for being strong enough to do the right thing, even when it meant losing everything I thought I had.